Okay, so House of the Dragon episode 5 is now out, and the entry centers around a big wedding between two of the major houses. As far as weddings go, I've seen worse when it comes to Game of Thrones, and all things considered, it's probably a big success. Cheers! Now as always, there's a ton of things to talk about, and throughout this video we're going to be breaking it all down, going over the book differences in it, and also what our theories for the future are. We won't be spoiling the major deaths or twists, but we might be discussing some things to add context to what you see, so if you don't want anything potentially ruined, then I recommend that you turn off now. If you enjoy the breakdown, then please hit the thumbs up button, and make sure you subscribe as we cover the series every week. With that out of the way, thank you for clicking this. Now let's get into House of the Dragon. Now we open with the Vale in what the book tells us is the year 115 AC. You'll likely recognise the Vale from the main Game of Thrones series, and it's a big area where people like to go skydiving. Here we see Lady Rhea for the first time, and Daemon has talked about her at numerous points throughout the season. Both in the show and book, she's referred to as the Bronze Bitch, and she comes just as fast as she goes, with us getting her death in the opening. Now as she rides out hunting, she comes across Daemon wearing his hood incognito like he was last week. She mocks him for potentially returning to consummate the marriage, and then says this line.
The Vale sheep might be willing, even if I'm not.
This is playing on the line with the High Council, in which Daemon said the following.
The Vale men are said to fuck sheep instead of women. I can assure you, the sheep are prettier.
Dear me.
Now the book also remarks on this line, and Daemon goes one step further by saying that everyone in the Vale f***s them. So you can see why this guy isn't happy. Also, I don't know if that's a beard or wool around his face, but moving on. Now sheep are mentioned basically every time that the Vale is brought up, with Daemon even saying that his sword Dark Sister was meant for more than slaughtering them. He hated the Vale, feeling like he was forced to take up this crap kingdom, which is why he tries to move away from his wife and onto other ones. Now her hearing of the sheep thing shows that Rhea has informants, and it lays the groundwork for why people could be suspicious over her death. This has massively changed things up from the source material, and though she died in similar circumstances, Daemon had nothing to do with it. Rhea was out hunting, and she ended up falling from her horse, which caused her to crack her skull off a stone. However, she was alive for 9 days after this, where she lay bedridden trying to recover. She ended up getting out of bed, and whilst she walked around for a bit, she collapsed an hour later and died immediately. Yeah, she just gets her head smashed like it's a like button after that skydiving joke, and this is clearly carried out by Daemon so that he can gain power. In the book, after there were rumours of him sleeping with Rhaenyra, he was exiled from the kingdom, and thus he tried to gain somewhere else to live. Here though, he's allowed back to the wedding, and it is important to bear in mind that the big event we see is the party before it that ushers in a lot of the tournaments in the book. These lasted for days and end, with Kristen beating Joffrey in a tournament rather than what we get here. The episode has the wedding take place immediately after the initial banquet, and it condenses everything down, including the arrival of the Greens. Daemon also made a move on Laena, which we see playing out here, and to the best of my knowledge, he did take part in the tournaments. Now in the books, after he learned of her death, he flew from Bloodstone and attempted to claim his inheritance. Here this happens at the wedding celebrations, whereas in the work he's rejected by Lady Jane Arryn rather than her cousin. Cut to the king's ship on stormy seas, and us seeing Viserys sick here foreshadows what's to come at the end of the entry. This is very much setting things in place for the fall of the king, and the boat ride here juxtaposes the calmer one from last week. They're riding out to Lord Corlys in order to try and get his son's hand in marriage, and the king is now living on borrowed time. Unlike the last couple of entries where we had major time jumps, this all seems to be happening not too long after the last episode, and we cut to Alicent meeting her father after his firing. In the source material, Otto travelled to the kingdom with his wife and Alicent, and the latter tended to King Jaehaerys. She went to his room when she was 15 and would read him stories, but they've sort of combined events here with Viserys, as he later ended up marrying her in the book. Otto still believes that Rhaenyra slept with Daemon, but as we know from last week, that didn't happen. However, the book is filled with rumours which said they did it over a number of nights, and Daemon proposed it under the guise of teaching her how to seduce Sir Criston Cole. In the source material, he rejected her advances, however here he didn't, and it creates a lot of issues once she decides to marry into the Valyrians. Now the book also altered things on how she lost her V-card, with it actually being Lionel Strong's son that she apparently lost her maidenhead to. Keep saying maidenhead because that's how it is in the book. Now he was brought up at Aegon's birthday to the king, and he did pop up last week. Shout out to you guys for pointing out that Harwin was the soldier that Rey ran into, and this is similar to how she lost that V-card in the book. They then got it on, and though this didn't happen in the series, You can kind of see how the rumours started to spread. They don't do that, but yeah, just important to bear in mind. The source material is made up of several second-hand accounts talking about events like this, but as I haven't mentioned that one yet, I thought I'd drop it in. Now Otto has worked out all the angles, and he knows that when Viserys dies that the realm won't accept her. This will make her kill Aegon and the rest of Alicent's kids in order to secure her claim. Thus Alicent takes things into her own hands, and she wears green, which we'll talk about more in detail later on in the video. Now Otto gets replaced by Lionel Strong, who's been promoted from being the Master of Laws. The show plays fast and loose with the timeline, as Otto was removed in 109 AC, and in 111 AC, the rumours that Daemon banged Rey started to come out. Here though, they happen side by side, and in the book, Lionel said that Daemon should be executed for taking her maidenhead. However, Viz just exiled him, and we all kind of get everything mushed together. Now after making it to high tide, Lord Corlys doesn't come out to greet the king, which is seen as an insult. You can catch Laenor and his buddy clashing swords, which I swear isn't a euphemism. Now, this place is located in Blackwater Bay, and the book describes it as displaying many of the treasures that Lord Corlys found on his voyages. This includes Crab Feeder's mask, which also demonstrates the conflict that Daemon helped him out in. Didn't point it out in our breakdown on the battle, but this is actually a fractured version of the mask that the Sons of the Harpies wore in the main Game of Thrones series. Cut to the weirwood tree, which we see seemingly bleeding. This actually happened because the trees had red sap, and it used to leak out of the cuts in the faces, making it appear like tears of blood. These faces were carved by the children of the forest, and later the First Men would end up worshipping them as being symbols of the gods of the forest. In the garden, we see Lord Larys, who in the book is nicknamed Clubfoot due to his ankle being twisted during birth. In the source material, he's a very manipulative character who's described as often listening and spying on people of the realm. We actually saw this all the way back in episode 3 when he sat down with a group of women under the guise of being unable to hunt.
When one is never invited to speak, one learns instead to observe.
He sniffs away at a flower from Bravos that shouldn't really be thriving in King's Landing, which could be seen as a way of planting the idea in Alicent's head that she has to rise up after all that she's been through. He snitches about the planned tea, and this makes Alicent think that she did sleep with Daemon. However, Kristen comes clean, which I swear isn't a euphemism, and admits to it. Now though it clears Rhaenyra, Alicent's still pretty annoyed that Rey didn't tell her about Sir Cole. The source material talks about how Kristen was deeply in love with her, and that he imagined a life with them together. Over time it said that because he couldn't be with her and she was off getting married, that he grew to be resentful. This explains his actions towards the end, and also why he gets pushed towards Alicent. Now back at the castle, we see Rhaenys come in and greet her cousin, which causes the king to wince in pain after she grabs his hand. As we pointed out in earlier breakdowns, he had his fingers cut off, and it's possible that the infection is spreading, causing his other ones to be in pain too. Now the disease that's tearing King Viserys apart is something that we've speculated over for weeks now. There's been lots of theories such as it being diabetes, rust in his blood, and a lot more. In the books, the illness was never given a name, but Paddy Considine has cleared things up in an interview with Entertainment Weekly. Though we initially thought it was grayscale, and the teaser for episode 5 even hinted towards it, we now know the truth and I am going to take the L. The actor said, he's actually suffering from a form of leprosy. His body is deteriorating, his bones are deteriorating. He's not actually old, he's still a young man in there, he's just, unfortunately, got this thing that's taken over his body. It becomes a metaphor for being king, and the stress and strain that it puts on you, and what it does to you physically, what it does to you mentally. I love this explanation, and it ties into the idea that those who are unfit to lead will be cut by the throne. This was massively talked about in the books, and I did like it that they were keeping it ambiguous, though Paddy has just spoiled it. Interestingly, leprosy can be transmitted quite easily through long-term exposure with someone, meaning that Alicent could end up getting it too. As mentioned earlier, this isn't talked about in the source material, but the show could be changing it up to make that be the case. They then inform him about Lady Rhea, and he ends up proposing a marriage between the kids. Comes down to surnames and the succession though, and though Viz won't let a Valyrian be king by name, their child will take the throne. This obviously completely overrides Aegon, and Viserys wants the Targaryens to rule the kingdom for the next 700 years. Now another interesting detail is that though the baby will be born with the surname Valyrian, it will change once they hit the throne. Cut to the beach, each lets go get away, and we see Rhaenyra and Laenor agreeing to some compromises. Got a lot of flashes of Dany here walking along the beach, and obviously the look of Rhaenyra is based on her. Or is it the other way? Either way, lots of stuff coming out including Laenor's sexuality, and though his father thinks it's a phase, it's going to cause a lot of problems. Once they have a kid, this will get a target on its back due to others viewing Aegon as being the rightful heir. The book discusses how Laenor prefers the company of his knights, and this is seen in his lover Joffrey. That name, Joffrey, I hate it. Now, Rhaenys has of course seen this firsthand, and though she was almost queen, Jaehaerys very much chose her cousin over his daughter because it was the best way to keep things at peace. The book goes into how Jaehaerys had one of the most peaceful reigns ever seen in the realm, and this is because he carried out choices like this. However, the opening of the chapter that centers on the events this show is inspired from very much sets the tone for what's to come. It says the seeds of war are often planted during times of peace, and this was the case with the family. Because the Targaryens were allowed to prosper due to the lack of war, they ended up having so many children that there were really 14 claims for the throne. Many of them wanted to seize it for themselves, which ended up causing them all to turn on each other. Had there been wars and death, then many of the kids would likely never have been born, so the peace very much backfired in a lot of ways. Viserys was adamant that he would keep the peace too, which is why he was so hesitant to join the war against Crabfeeder. He very much looked at Jaehaerys and wanted to continue his legacy, but this lack of action enabled countless enemies to be created. Viserys has left things wide open, and a lot of this episode is very much about how the pair are doomed from the off, which is reflected in their wedding. Cut across to Rhaenyra sailing home, and in case you missed our last video, then you might notice that the royal cabin also looks similar in design to the one used on the chariots for their horse cart. Criston is Rhae's side chick, and they do change things up quite a lot from the book. So according to the Gossip Mushroom, Rhae put herself forward to Criston, but he completely rejected her. However, wanting to have his cake and eat it, he was still besotted by the princess. Shortly after this, the wedding started to get set up, and from here we get varying tales about what really happened. The book does say that Criston ended up slipping into her bedroom, where he put forward the idea that they should move away together, and that they'd be safe in the Free Cities. Rhaenyra rejected this and said that she wanted to be more than the wife of a sellsword, which is basically the Game of Thrones name for a mercenary. Now, we don't know for definite if this tale is true or not, but the source material doesn't really talk about them sleeping together. As much as Rhaenyra seemed to be sick of duty and the crown in the first episode, we see how the burden of responsibility has finally gotten to her and she stays in her post. Still though, if the king can fling, then she can too. Now Criston doesn't want to be that though, and he says this.
So you want me to be your whore?
Now the guy goes through a lot of internal struggles this entry, and he ends up losing it. Clearly torn between his duty, station, whether to subscribe to the person he loves or not, he goes on a really interesting arc, and at the end of the video, I'll talk about where things go with him in the book. I will give a spoiler warning, so don't worry, but he strikes up an unlikely alliance with Alicent at this point. He's called her the Queen, and I was expecting it to be a big misunderstanding, with her thinking he was confirming the Daemon rumours. However, he admits he had his dick in a box like Rick and Varys, and I think that she very much sees him as someone she can get on her side by showing mercy. The more people she has on her side from Rhaenyra's, the more powerful she'll be, and though she initially started off as a weak girl, the wedding dress shows her true intentions. You can see Alicent really sinking her claws into him early on, and though he could be sentenced to death, I think Criston sees this almost as an act of mercy, and that he owes his life to her. Cut to Viserys looking like me on Sunday, putting this video up at 3 AM, and there's a lot of symbolism and iconography in this scene. He sits in front of the model of Old Valyria, and the family of course came from this and ended up ruling over the Seven Kingdoms. Valyria was destroyed in a volcanic eruption known as the Doom of Valyria, and this is of course similar to our own Pompeii. It killed most there, including a lot of the dragons, with the Targaryen Dragon Lords being the only major house that survived. Viz sits in front of this doomed monument towards the city, and we know that he is too, due to his illness taking over. Now he does seem to regret that the songs about him won't be about big wars, and that those who remember him won't bring up battles. However, he's told to find some comfort in this, as it's better to live in peace. Viserys wishes that he'd been tested, but don't look a gift horse in the mouth, mate, leave well enough alone. Now I actually thought that he died at this point, as we get a long fade out. However, it just shows the arrival of Corlys and also his fleet. Got a lot of Dance of the Dragons vibes from this imagery of two swooping down, and in case you don't know, the term Dance of the Dragons carries a lot with it. Now the series sort of changes things up from the book, and it's reordered certain events so we get a bit of drama. In the work we had the wedding, and then there was a giant tournament held in honour of this. It was at this point that Daemon returned with his new kingdom, and he handed this over. It's also at the tournament where the green and black rivalry is formed, as well as the events with Sir Criston. So the book explains it as all those in support of Alicent and Aegon show this by wearing green. On the other side of this, those that back Rhaenyra wear the typical Targaryen red and black, hence the name greens and blacks. Now the tournament saw Criston attacking Harwin Strong, who, as we mentioned earlier, was the one who took Rhaenyra's maidenhead. Maidenhead. Not a prude though, I will say they had sex. Now, he ended up hitting Harwin's body so badly that he broke his collarbone and elbow, the both of which were completely shattered. Anyway, this was under tournament rules, so it was fine. However, what caused the controversy that led him to Alicent was the attack on Joffrey, similar to what we see here. Named Joffrey Lonmouth, he was nicknamed the Knight of Kisses, and he was secretly Laenor's lover. In the tournament, Criston beat the crap out of him, and he hit him so badly with Morningstar that it completely cracked his head open. Joffrey then died 6 days later without regaining consciousness, and Criston was spurned across the kingdom by all except Alicent. The tournament here is condensed into just being a fight after Criston becomes a wedding crasher and loses it over what's going on. Feel like Joffrey tries to taunt him whilst also being like, we all have to keep each other's secrets, and due to Criston taking a vow, he doesn't want the stuff with Rhaenyra getting out. This is another factor as to why he loses it and does the things that he does. Now the Lannister twins arrive, both played by Jefferson Hall, and at this point Tywin is the master of ships. In the book, both he and his brother try to marry Rhaenyra, but here it's just been Jason. Now after the Valyrians show up, Daemon returns, much to the chagrin of his brother. As we mentioned in the book, he was exiled after the rumours of Rhaenyra, but he came back to the tournament wearing black and red. In the book it said that the rivalry between the two factions could be seen on full display at this event once the dragons of the two sides started snapping at each other. Here though it's ushered in by Alicent's arrival, and why this colour is so offensive is because the beacon on Hightower is turned to green to signal war. Hightower is of course Alicent and Otto's surname, and this is a declaration in front of everyone that things are going to kick off. Symbolically, it also happens during the speech about uniting the houses, metaphorically showing how the Greens will disrupt the entire union. Alicent also goes to her uncle, who also just so happens to be wearing green, and they say that they stand with her. Daemon is accused at this point, but I don't know if he's the kind of person you want to go against, mate. Guy basically did this to Crab Feeder.
Call an ambulance! Call an ambulance! But not for me!
Now Daemon ends up trying down with Laena, and it's clear that he's after another kingdom. He of course allied himself with the Valyrians in the war against Crab Feeder, so it makes sense that he'd try this strategy next. He also seems to be flirting with Rhaenyra, and she even tempts him with taking her to Dragonstone. Rhaenyra was named the princess of this in the books, though they also discussed how Daemon wanted the kingdom to himself. Before we can see what happens though, the fight breaks out with Criston hitting Laenor and smashing Joffrey's face in. Viserys also starts to bleed from his nose, and he finally collapses at the wedding. Next to the weirwood tree, Criston goes to commit seppuku, which is a term that first originated in Japan after samurais disemboweled themselves. It has many uses, and was predominantly put in place when samurais were behind enemy lines and they took their own life instead of being captured. However, it was also seen to be used by those that broke the code of honour, which is very much the case with Sir Criston. Knights weren't meant to go around sleeping with the princesses, and they all took vows to ensure this wasn't the case. In the books, one of the reasons that Rhaenyra was hesitant to go off with him is because he broke his vows, and she thinks that he'd do the same when it came to the ones for marriage. Alicent then calls out to him and stops him from doing this. After Viz drops down, we cut to a puddle of blood, as well as a rat scurrying to lick it up. Now the order of this is of course a bit off, as Alicent is at Viserys' side when he falls to the ground. I think that with him being like this, that she probably wouldn't have left his side either, and likely would have spent the night nursing him. Now she real likely went to Criston, stopped him, and then proceeded with the wedding, which is when Viz collapsed. I do want to talk about what's coming down the line with the pair, but in case you don't want any spoilers, I thought I'd give my review first. Now I thought this was a slightly slower entry than the first three, but it also had so much going on with it. Like the rat coming for the blood at the end, we've watched as the rats in the cast have slowly started to circle the king, so that they can prey off his bloodline, which I swear is on a reach. This ending shot is very symbolic, and just in the same way that Viserys fell, we have this house of cards starting to come crashing down. Rhaenyra is obviously doing the whole wedding for show, as is her husband, and it's not the best union that the pair can stand on. The declaration of war by Alicent is fascinating to watch. I feel like this show is at its strongest when you're seeing the subtext to what's going on rather than what's being said. This is basically just one big chess game playing out in real time, and even knowing the book, it's nice seeing how unpredictable some of it really is. I really think there's a slow burn to these entries, but they always go out with a bang that makes it worth sticking through the slightly longer paced parts. overall, really enjoying the show, and I hope that you're having fun with the breakdowns. Now, as for future spoilers, I just want to talk about the stuff with Alicent and Kristen, but if you don't want any of that ruined, then thanks for sitting until this part of the video. I'll see you on the next one. You still here? Okay, so after the tournament, Alicent ended up taking Kristen as her personal sword, and Rhaenyra lost her bodyguard. Due to slowly turning against Rhae, Kristen ended up becoming a strong supporter of Alicent, and he was very much a person that pushed the idea that her child was the true heir. He also helped to train her kids as swordsmen, and became one of Alicent's greatest allies. This pushed the Greens and Black War further than it had been, with them vying for the throne. Anyway, that's all the spoilers, that's the video. Hope you had a good tease of what's coming next time, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on it below. Just to let you know, we're running a competition right now and giving away 3 copies of Thor Love and Thunder on the 15th of October. All you have to do to be on the chance of winning is like the video, make sure you subscribe with notifications on, and drop a comment below with your thoughts on the episode. We pick the comments at random at the end of the month, and the winners of the last one are on screen right now, so if that's you, then message me on Twitter at Heavy Spoilers. If you want something else to watch, then make sure you check out one of our breakdowns on screen right now, and huge thank you for all the support. Hope you've enjoyed working with us up until this halfway point in the series, and let's roll on the next 5 episodes. Without the way, thanks for sitting through the video. I've been Paul, I'll see you next time. Take care, peace.